Thanks for joining me. If you've already seen my talk, Much Ado About Something, this material, this first module, is pretty similar. The next two modules, called It Works and the Regional Advantage of Santa Cruz, are unique to this idea of applying the leading ideas in high tech to a small business. My name is Alex Cowan. I run a software company called Leonid Systems. Leonid builds enterprise software for service providers, companies like Verizon and France Telecom. I'm also the author of Starting a Tech Business, published in April by Wiley. Starting a tech business is about bringing your ideas to life, about approaching technology-enabled businesses as a non-engineer. My area of interest is the big void between all the new ideas about how to start companies and how to build technology and great products and actual practice. And that's what starting a tech business is about, and that's what we're going to talk about in this talk today. Let's talk about you for a minute. I've made a few assumptions about you, the audience. Hopefully these are right and you don't get bored. First, I've assumed that you have a desire to learn more about launching new ideas for products and services. Second, I'm not assuming that you have any prior knowledge of high tech or technology in general. Thirdly, I'm assuming you want to take action, that you want to leave this talk with ideas that you can sit down and apply tomorrow. So in these first 20 minutes, we're going to cover some leading ideas. In the modules you see attached to this, we're also going to look at practical ways to apply these ideas using the Penny Ice Creamery from Santa Cruz County, California as a case study. And then lastly, we're going to cover the regional advantages of Santa Cruz, specifically around the artisanal foods business. The four ideas we're going to talk about are ideation, planning, organization, and development. Ideation is the process of pulling together your idea. There used to be this concept of self-love, the idea that you have your idea, you stick with it to the end, bitter or sweet. And this is a very classical idea in some ways, but now we have this practice of design thinking, which is a little different. It involves the practice of empathy and applying that empathy towards creative solutions, honed through iterations to apply to your user in a way that you know makes sense. In some ways, I mentioned that this idea of self-love is a very classical idea. Henry Ford said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. And there's some validity to that, especially if you're breaking new ground. But once you have product out in the market, there's really absolutely no reason ever not to be going out and practicing a high degree of empathy with your customers. And look at Ford now. I would say that empathy is the first pillar of design thinking. The woman in this photo is a seamstress. She's at a sewing machine, but seamstresses spend a lot of time cutting, and they spend a lot of time cutting very carefully. They need a high degree of control and dexterity with this cutting. Somebody at some point went out and had a high degree of empathy for the seamstress, and they created sewing scissors. If you've ever picked up sewing scissors, your hand slides into them perfectly, and they give you a great amount of dexterity. You can work with them for a long time without your hands hurting. And you don't have to be the person that can go out and mill a pair of scissors to practice design thinking. The main thing is you just have to care about the user. Fortunately, there are a couple ready-made tools that come out of technology that will help you apply this, and they tie into the agile development methodology, which we'll talk about towards the end here. The first one is personas. Personas are vivid descriptions of your user. This is a sample persona, and this is a counterexample. This is what a persona should not look like. This photo is a stock photo. These bullet points came off of the internet. There's some vague statistical aggregate. This is a persona that's a little better. It clearly has a photo that's lo-fi. It was taken with my iPhone, and you can see that the description is a narrative story about this person, this persona. And that's really what the difference is between a good persona and a bad persona. Good persona is created by someone who spent a lot of time out in the field with these people, and it gives you a description like you would know this person like your best friend. Once you have personas, you move on and you tell stories about these personas. A story may seem like kind of a little bit of a fast and loose thing to use in building a product or engineering your business, but actually I think you'll find it's quite organized, and it really helps you do a good job of describing the intent of what you want to have happen with your product before you jump forward to the implementation. A story always has these three parts. As a persona, I want to do something so that I can derive a benefit. And it's interesting, I coach a few teams, and this third part, the derive a benefit part of the story, is frequently left out. And I'll admit, when I first started writing user stories, I often left it out myself too. But it is probably the most important part, particularly when you're in the early stages of developing your idea. And the reason why is that it's the part that establishes the relevance of your story, and that's what you're really going out and validating as you go and you learn about vetting your idea and making sure it really fits. Personas are actually very, very, very easy to organize. This idea of an epic story, which encapsulates a big set of actions, and then you nest stories within those epic stories, and then you attach test cases to each story, like make sure you can use MasterCard, make sure you can use Visa. And this is how you supplement the stories with additional detail about what you want to have happen with the product. And these stories are very consumable by people that are developing software or otherwise implementing your idea, and that's one of their best attributes. The main thing about design thinking is you have to care. You have to want to produce something really good that the user likes. This photo was taken in front of the Tate, which is an art institution in the UK. The stencils by the mysterious and wonderful street artist Banksy. So everyone's able to practice design thinking. The main impetus is and the main facilitator is desire. You have to want to produce something that's really valuable to the user. The next item we have is planning. How are you going to map out your idea into a business and go execute it? Before, we had the 5-year plan. A lot of investors, venture capitalists, called this the big lie. It was an exercise everyone felt they had to go through, but everyone knew in the case of a startup, the odds of hitting your 5-year plan are worse than trying to hit the lottery. Now, we have this idea of iterative management. So the great thing that the iterative management techniques that we'll go over have done for us is, the 5-year plan is inappropriate to a startup because you just don't have that level of visibility. If somebody asks you, hey, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? You could probably look at the historical data and say, well, it'll probably be about 85 degrees. But if they asked you, well, can you tell me that out to the third significant digit? You'd probably say, well, no, there's no way to really know that. And that's the issue with the 5-year plan in the case of a startup. However, having no plan at all and just kind of blowing around in the wind is equally unmanageable. And the great thing is that there was a fabulous standby for all this all along, a far superior substitute. It was highlighted in Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup. Science. In science, you have an idea. You formulate a hypothesis, which is a set of assumptions and statements about the idea that are provable or disprovable. You design experiments to prove or disprove those things. You look at your results, and then you either know, okay, my idea was wrong, I have to revise, or I proved it, my idea is valid, and I should press ahead, scale the idea. So there's a few tools that you can use to do this stuff. First, a simple table of assumptions. This should have, at a minimum, a column that tells you your priority, and you should prioritize the assumptions that are most important and easiest to prove at the top of your list and work your way down. So the second one is the assumption itself. The third one is, does it need proving? Just because an assumption is important doesn't necessarily mean you need to prove it. And we'll look at a couple examples in a second. And the last item is experimentation. How are you going to prove out this idea? And this is enough space, of course, just for a bullet point or something. You may have whole documents, set of notes on how you're going to do your experiments. So this assumption, parents want to better organize the distribution of allowances for their kids. That needs to be proven, because maybe really parents overall think that what they do is perfectly fine. Examples of these simple experiments you can do is post the proposition for an app that does this in an online ad, probably a Google AdWords ad. See if people click through to it. See then if they sign up on a landing page that you direct them to, and generally express interest. Parents have smartphones. This is important, but it doesn't need to be proven. The next tool we have is if the 5-year plan with 40, 100 pages of details about what's going to happen isn't the right thing, what is? There's this idea of a business model canvas introduced by a man named Alex Osterwalder and his team. The idea with the business model canvas is that there's 9 key areas that you can sit down and detail on this canvas in this very lightweight, very immediately visible way to talk about the business and think through it in a disciplined way with your team without spending all this time building a business plan that you'll rarely, if ever, dust off and actually operate against. The third planning tool is a financial model, and this needs to be fairly detailed in the right places. In the relatively short term, you want to make sure that you have your expenses detailed out carefully so that you don't have to worry about money every day. And then you want to make sure the model has a facility where you can extrapolate out the size of the business and the earnings that it can create based on an understanding your unit economies when you have those. What you don't want to do is this thing of trying to predict the weather out to 3 significant digits when you don't have that data. And that's the most important thing to avoid in wasting time on the financial model. So there's 3 tools: the assumptions, the business model canvas, and a financial model. There's a financial model on the website, alexandercowan.com. So let's go through this iterative management idea. First question, you have your idea. Do I have real evidence from my buyer that this is compelling? The second question is around your hypothesis. What are the key assumptions required to make this business work? Which are the most important? And you can organize those in the simple table that we looked at earlier. Thirdly, how do I definitively prove or disprove the most important assumptions with a minimum of time and effort? Those are your experiments. You execute those, and this gives you a great focal point for the day-to-day because startups have a difficult pairing of urgency and uncertainty, and it's real nice to have a prioritized list of assumptions that you're focused on proving out, so you focus on what's important and not just on what's urgent. You do your analysis and you figure out, do I need to revise this or do I need to persevere and scale up the business? This idea of pivot or persevere is a great encapsulating phrase that was introduced by Eric Ries in the Lean Startup. Organization, how do you put together a group of people to actually do this stuff? Back then, you had this idea of what I call aping, and the idea was you make a startup a big company by aping the habits of a big company, hiring the same kind of people, organizing in the same way. And Steve Blank, in his book 4 Steps to the Epiphany, introduced this idea of customer development with the express point that a startup is fundamentally different than a large company. And this was a great point. This gave us the idea of customer development, where you have a small, relatively loosely organized team that's working on assessing this product market fit, on figuring out what exactly are we going to build, who exactly is going to buy it and why, and how, is that something we can scale up? So let's look at how this all works from the founding of a company to its first board meeting in kind of the old way and the new way. In the old way, founders get a great new idea. They create a 5-year plan to excite the VCs with 10x returns because that's what VCs want to see. This has a chain of assumptions that's so long and tenuous that you have better odds of winning the lottery, and that's tough. But let's say the VCs invest. It's a hot space, and they are in kind of a scale business, most of them themselves, and they want to put a lot of capital to work. So they encourage the founders to go out and make these executive hires from big companies and hire the lawyers and accountants that love to work with big companies. And the problem there is that big company experience is not the same thing as small company experience. The new hires come in with their established track records from these big companies. They expect the place to look like a big company. They put their recipes that they've successfully applied in these larger companies to work. And the problem is that that's just not fundamentally the same thing as the hands-on discovery, the management of uncertainty that you have to be able to work through when you're in a startup and you haven't yet ascertained a product market fit. So this expanded team is working to conform to this 5-year plan. Impossible. Better luck, not impossible, but extremely unlikely. If you succeed, you're probably succeeding in spite of all this and not because of it. Founders have to go to the first board meeting. They concoct, as time goes along, stranger and stranger stories about how what's happening has a relationship back to the 5-year plan. They're making revisions to this, talking to the board, and it's just, you can kind of see where this leads. Let's take a look at this. With these new ideas at work, the founders get an idea, they lay out all the key assumptions to make a business out of it in a prioritized fashion, and they are out validating as many of those as they can before they have to do anything. And this focus reduces probably almost certainly the amount of capital, financial capital they need to go out and get, because they have discrete iterations, discrete milestones that they're going to organize the business around. They may or may not need to go to investors to get to these first few milestones. And that lowers the capital requirements and opens up non-traditional funding strategies like bootstrapping the thing, like looking for ancillary sources of revenue like consulting, going to friends and family because it's a manageable amount of money. They bring in resources and advisors as needed, and they have a clear, immediate focus, these new hires, on validating these assumptions. They know exactly what they should do. They're not trying to make the place look like a big company. They are trying to validate a set of assumptions so the company can identify whether it's got a product market fit or not. And that keeps things focused. It keeps them moving along. Everybody's validating the assumptions. The team is running full tilt at this pivot or persevere moment. Progress is measurable. Progress, it should be relatively quick if the experiments are well designed. And when it's time to face the music with the board, which may just be the founders themselves, you have a set of conclusions from your data. And this is good. Everybody gets to decide, hey, was this true or was this not true? The worst thing that happens is you learn a whole bunch of things that you can probably apply somewhere else, and that tends to work pretty well. The last area we're going to talk about is development, product development. So the old way was what's called waterfalls. So the idea is when you move in these discrete sequences, requirements, design, then we implement against the design, verify, maintain. And these are really process that's designed to build large things over long time scales. It's very poorly suited to a startup for a lot of obvious reasons. You can't write a requirements document when you don't know what's going on out there. You're out there learning the whole time, and you want to be able to incorporate that learning back into what you're doing. Agile is extremely popular with startups. It has a bunch of really good features. First, it takes personas and stories as inputs. And those are if you'll remember, the outputs of the design thinking work that we looked at the beginning of the talk. The development is driven by discussions, interactive discussions between the people that are out there learning about the market and the people that are building the stuff. And for small businesses in general, I think this has 3 really good features. One, it keeps you from doing things in a sequence where you don't necessarily know whether at the end of it the whole thing's going to make sense. This is a really fascinating experiment that Eric Ries highlighted in Lean Startup, where if you have 100 pieces of paper and 100 envelopes, what do? Do you fold all the pieces of paper and then put them in the envelopes, or do you do them one at a time? And I actually said, of course, you'd fold all the paper and then you'd go do the envelopes. It's like a factory, and it's fascinating. That's actually much slower because you end up shuffling this paper around, and the not to mention the fact that what if the paper doesn't actually fit in the envelope? So Agile is great because you get things in these small batches is the other great feature about it, and that allows you to see whether what you're doing is actually working or not. And the third thing, related thing, is that it operates in 2 to 6 week cycles generally, and as a small business, you can maybe do it at month end, and it gives you this manageable checkpoint where you're looking at, is what I'm doing really valid? Have I validated it based on actual operation in the field, or is it not? And it's good to have those regular checkpoints. There's something in all of us that just wants to charge ahead and try to get to the end, but if you don't want to make this blind progress and achieve a goal that doesn't make any sense. Life, when you're operating with Agile and you're the manager or you're the person responsible for going out and assessing the market, is you have your last stuff you just did and you're taking that out and you're validating it in your market. In the present iteration, you're working with your team, you're collaborating with them, providing this market data, these personas, these stories. You're articulating what's going on with your customers when people have questions about them, the people that are building your stuff. And then in the future, for the future iteration, you're planning out what you ought to build and prioritizing it for your team. So in summary, design thinking gives us direction, personas, and user stories. Iterative management gives us this idea of an explicit hypothesis about the business and an experimental design to prove or disprove it. Customer development gives us roles and objectives for a team. That's very appropriate to organizing for this type of an execution. Agile gives us working product in small batches so we can carefully monitor what we're doing, make sure it makes sense, and most importantly, incorporate the ongoing learning we have about what we're finding into what we're doing. Thanks. My Twitter feed and my blog are here. The next talk, It Works When You Do It, is about applying these ideas in the case of a non-tech small business called the Penny Ice Creamery in Santa Cruz County, California.